I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
Right now, I really do feel this is the greatest opportunity we've ever had to reinvent ourselves. The tools are out there. The gatekeepers are disappearing. The opportunities exist. I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of people on my podcast. I also have my own experiences that through trial and error, I learned the techniques that really helped me to reinvent myself, to master a new area of life, to get good, to get successful, to thrive. I want you to have a copy of what I think is one of my best books that I've ever written, Reinvent Yourself. All you have to do is go to www.reinventbook.net. That's www.reinventbook.net. Whether you want to supplement your income with a little extra cash or replace your job, the book Reinvent Yourself will show you how. I've reserved a copy for anyone listening to this today. All you have to do is go to www.reinventbook.net. That's www.reinventbook.net.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So a lot of this book, I think, it's almost like a love letter to these board games. A lot of these lessons, it feels like, are the direct benefits of playing these games to your life. So for instance, you enjoy them, you learn history, you learn some aspects of capitalism and what makes a good game, what makes a good set of rules, what makes a good player. I'm wondering if there's more lessons in life. Like, this is how I acquire skills in something, or this is how I learn when I need to be more offensive rather than defensive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's a game that everyone needs to play to teach them about statistics. It's over in half an hour, which is what, a lot of people like. They like shorter games. It's actually a classic. It's called Can't Stop.
I don't know it.
You don't know it. Most people don't know it. It's one of these games that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame of games. And it's called Can't Stop. It's a simple game, and the title says it all. It's what's known as a push your luck game. And you can play it with like a 10-year-old. It's a super fun game.
What's your number one classic game?
It's chess, but I hate it so much. It's and it's actually, and I didn't know you were a chess master until I came on. I'm not sure I would have come on if I knew you were a chess master.
Because you hate just chess players.
It's intimidating. No, it's kind of like, a person, I don't know, it's like a person telling you they went to Harvard or something. Yeah, sure.
Good.
Yeah, sure. It's unclear to me if we've started already, though. Like, have we
No,
started
no,
recording?
no.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, we probably started recording,
I'm just
but
being-
we'll officially start now.
This is just fluffing that's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So excited to have Jonathan Kay on the podcast. Jonathan and his co-author, Joan Moriarty, just wrote a book called Your Move, What Board Games Teach Us About Life. Jonathan, I guess you play a lot of board games?
Yeah, I love board games, and I didn't know I was doing research for the book until I got the idea for it a couple of years ago, and then, yeah, it turned out that all those games I was playing informed the book you have in front of you.
And I'll ask the obvious, naive question, but do board games actually teach you about life?
They do, but
I
not.
mean, I read the book and I see your answer.
Yeah, they do, but not if you're, an adult and you're still playing Battleship. Part of the purpose of the book is to help people get beyond a lot of the games they've been playing since they were kids. My co-author is actually a full-time worker at a board game cafe, and she says she's just like alarmed at the number of people who are clearly smart, clearly intellectually curious, and all they want to do is play like Candyland and games they played when they were 8 years old. And her cafe has like 1,000 amazing games that many of which have been published in the last decade or two. And so, yes, you can learn from board games, but you have to take the leap and go out of your comfort zone and not play the games you were playing in your rec room when you were a kid.
Yeah, because I guess you can divide games, non-digital games, into three categories. There's the kind of games from the past century that were for children, like Candyland or Life or Shoots and Ladders. These games that were kind of primarily chance-based, and you played with parents played them with their toddlers, whatever. Then there's the older, more, I would say, more sophisticated games like chess, Go. You could throw poker in that. Many card games you could throw into that category. Bridge. I'd even include Scrabble in that category, even though it's a more recent invention, but it's a sophisticated game. And then there's the games you mostly discuss in this book, which are these very intense, complicated strategy games, almost like I would say how it's like Risk grown up.
Yeah.
So like domination of the world in some way, but in a much more sophisticated way than just rolling the dice and aiming for Madagascar.
Yeah, you knew Madagascar and Irkutsk in Ukraine would get in there somehow because I did play Risk, and I think your typology is correct that you do have these classic games like chess and backgammon and stuff like that, and then you have these games that we grew up with. I'm 50, which are sometimes derisively called Ameritrash by European board gamers, and that name is sort of stuck. It's sort of like Battleship, Candyland, Monopoly. Real gamers love play Monopoly.
Yeah, you and your co-author have this heated argument about Monopoly throughout the book.
We do. Yeah,
and I would argue Monopoly's a little bit more sophisticated than Candyland. Maybe it's around Risk levels.
It ruins more relationships than Candyland because it's a poorly designed game because if you're losing the game, you could get eliminated and then your friends play for the next 2 hours and you just sit there becoming bitter. But the third category is sometimes called Euro games, and that's like Settlers of Catan. Some of your listeners may have played Ticket to Ride, games like that. And actually, in the second chapter of the book, we discuss the emergence of these so-called Euro games. And it has to do with history because it used to be that if you wanted to play a big, sophisticated strategy game, it was a war game. You were reenacting World War II or you were reenacting Gettysburg or something like that. And then after World War II, for perfectly understandable reasons, in Europe, people didn't want to play war games, like especially in Germany. It just had a horrible historical resonance. So you had a bunch of Germans sitting around and, planning the opposite of war this time. And they said, let's create games that are about building. And so like Settlers of Catan is a perfect archetype of a Euro game because there's no combat. It's not a war game. It's a strategy game, but it's about building something. And if you look at all of these new Euro games that have come around in the last couple of decades, there's always a focus on constructing things. And so you can play something strategic and thought-provoking and interesting, and it's not necessarily like this Napoleonic thing where you're moving little armies around the map, which turns a lot of people off and always has a militaristic theme.
Well, but there are a lot of in that category of like these very complicated, sophisticated games. There's a lot of almost like war simulation games where you're in a battle in World
Yeah.
War II, and you have to win a series of battles.
Well, I stuck those in
And
because
it's very historical. Like, it's
Yeah.
very historically accurate.
So I think you're probably referring to, I think it's like the third to last chapter. It's about a game called Advanced Squad Leader, which is a game I love. That is an old school World War II tactical game. I think it originates in the 1970s. And that's a very much an American game because World War II games are still, I would say they're like, they carry better historical baggage than in Europe. So yeah, you still get a lot of old school war gamers. I mean, I travel all over the United States to play war games, but that's a subculture within the subculture of board games. And if you go into most board game cafes, people aren't interested in spending like 5 hours, simulating the Battle of Stalingrad. They're more interested in something that has like more upbeat atmospherics, like some of these other games we've been talking about.
And then I guess to kind of break down, I guess maybe there's a fourth category, which is card games like Cards Against Humanity, Secret Hitler, where I would say there's still a skill level, but it's a little bit more psychological. Whereas in Sellers of Catan, maybe the skill level is a little more strategic.
Okay, so there is a whole class of games which are, I would classify as social psych games. And these are games that there's not a lot of strategy in the conventional sense. There's some games popular called Werewolf. There's another game called Junta, which is about you're playing mind games with other people trying to take over a mythical South American country. But the whole purpose of these social psych games is to get inside the head of the other person and predict what they're doing. And you're looking around the table and you're trying to figure out who is secretly in cahoots with who and who's going to backstab who. And I'm completely terrible at those games because I'm pretty good at figuring out my own strategy, but when you're trying to figure out what's inside other people's brains and you have to read their facial expression and stuff like that, I'm awful at it. And one of the educating things about board games is you're learning about yourself. Like, there's a reason I'm good at some kinds of games and I'm terrible at other kinds of games.
Well, let me ask you a question. Are you good at poker, for instance?
No, I'm horrible.
So, because poker, I would argue you have to look around at people's faces and see what's going on.
Yeah, but I'm bad at poker for two reasons. One, I'm bad at the social aspect. I'm not interested in playing games for money. And poker is a completely uninteresting game to play if you're not playing for money. So I'm bad at that. I'm also just bad at like kind of the macho cultural aspects of poker, like going to some dude's house and it's like he's got a $200 whiskey and he's smoking and it's just all that bullshit. I hate that. I want to be in an airless conference room in Cleveland playing with like 200 other guys recreating World War II battles. Like those are my people.
So do you like those? Because I sort of always felt that part of the attraction of the war game, specifically like this ASL that you like,
Advanced Squad Leader, yeah.
Yeah. So part of the attraction is it's almost like a safe way to re-experience history without actually being in a war.
That's a huge part of it. So like that particular game, it's rare that you're going to get someone who plays that game who doesn't have at least a passing interest in World War II. And by the way, like in my personal politics and stuff like that, I don't own a gun. I'm not interested.
You're Canadian.
I'm a Canadian, yeah. Like I'm very close to pacifistic in my politics. And if I'm out, I'm out on the street and I hear a car backfire, I start running. Like I don't like any kind of gunplay in my personal life, but I'm fascinated by history. I'm fascinated, I still have like a schoolboy's fascination with war, but that's not really the main aspect I like about these complicated war games. What I like about it is they're very realistic in the sense of the historical detail. And they occupy like a giant part of my brain. When I'm playing it, just the entire world is completely blurred out. Like, that old comment about artificial intelligence and chess. Computers are very good at making a perfect chess move when the house is burning down. Whereas like human intelligence is like, I'm not going to play chess, I'm going to run out of the house. Whereas computers are sort of like, they get tunnel vision. You do get a certain kind of tunnel vision when you're playing these really complex games, and it's therapeutic. Like it's almost like a form of meditation.
So it's like a flow state.
It's total flow state. And you're not looking at your phone. Like sometimes I'll be playing these games and 7 or 8 hours will pass. And like in ordinary life, I rarely go 90 minutes without snacking. But I'll go half a day playing these games. I don't realize I'm hungry. I don't realize like it's gone from day to night. I haven't checked my phone. That part of it is amazing, and I don't get that with anything else in life.
So I'm always curious because I acknowledge that these board games, which I feel like are a little bit more youthful. Like when I go, so there's a place, the Hex Cafe, a few blocks up, that there's hundreds or 1,000 of these board games that people could check out and play and drink coffee, and they're with their friends, and it always seems to be a younger crowd. Uh, uh, what's the fascination of those versus the classic games that have been around hundreds or even thousands of years, like Go, chess? I'll throw poker in the category, other card games, backgammon. Even Connect Four is a variation on games that are thousands of years old.
So one of the defining aspects of chess is there's no luck. And that's what makes chess such a terrible game for couples to play. Because if one person is better than the other person at chess, that person's going to win like 9 out of 10 games. It's not going to be fun for the other person.
Right. Although there's ways to, I agree with you that chess is a perfect information game. So all of the information is on the board. There's no there's no dice. There's no cards that you're holding that the other person doesn't know about. All the information is on the board. There's a way to handicap though. You can adjust times on a clock, or you can take your rook off.
But once you do that, then it takes all the fun out of winning. It's like winning the B division at your tennis club. Like
Right.
no one wants to win the B division at their tennis club.
Although we were talking a little before the podcast about the game Go, which is arguably the most popular game in the world because it's the most popular game in China. And there, the handicap system is very clean. Like you just give the weaker player has a few free moves in the beginning, and as they improve, the handicap gets less and less, and that's thought of as part of the game.
What you find in the most popular games these days is there's a sort of like golden zone in terms of the role of luck in the game. So games that are all luck, because there are some games like Snakes and Ladders.
It's all luck.
It's a perfectly deterministic system. In fact, there are some people who say Snakes and Ladders isn't a game because there's no free will, right? Like it's a philosophical.
I would agree with that.
Sorry?
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's completely mechanistic. On the other hand, one of my favorite games is backgammon because it's probably like 70% skill and 30% luck.
I would say it's in the long run. Like let's say you're playing,
It's 100
for 500 points. It's probably 99% skill.
Okay, so everything regresses to the mean, right, in terms of skill. But if let's say you played 3 or 4 games, low sample size, luck plays a role, and it plays enough of a role that an intermediate player has some hope of doing well against a really good player, which is just, you can't do that in chess unless you go through the somewhat infantilizing step of actually removing pieces from the board.
That's right. So backgammon and poker have these great qualities where there's enough chance that in 1 or 2 games or 3 or 4 games, the weakest player could beat the best player in the world. And that's what makes them such great gambling games, because weak players don't understand always the odds and think that, I'm good at this because they've had luck in the past, and they're willing to play against strong players. But when in chess or Go, that's not the case.
By the way, you mentioned poker. I hate poker. I hate poker because when you look on TV and you see the people who are playing it and the expressions on their faces, they're like people. The guys are like, I wouldn't let my daughters date guys like that. And everyone looks scuzzy, and they just look emotionally flatlined, because you have to appear emotionally flatlined to be successful at poker. And who wants to play a game where the goal is to remove your humanity? Like even when they win, like they look like they've been emotionally neutered, and that's the opposite of what I want from my game experience. And it's also like, I'm not an anti-capitalist, but it also shows how the profit motive can ruin things. The game tournaments that I go to, in a million years, no one would bet $5 on a game. It would totally ruin the experience. It'd be like offering your girlfriend money for sex. Like it would be completely against the spirit of the relationship you have with the people there.
And yet, a lot of the lessons we'll talk about the specific lessons because that's what this book is about. But a lot of the lessons you've learned from board games, or you and your co-author learned from board games, you can say that similar lessons can be learned from poker, chess, backgammon, some of these other games and stuff. And I was going to ask you also about Scrabble. You're pretty heated about Scrabble in the book.
So I hate Scrabble. Now, the chapter that I wrote on Scrabble started off as just a straight out screed against how much I hate Scrabble. And one of my good friends in Canada, his name's John Chu. He is one of Canada's greatest Scrabble players, and in fact, he makes his living going around the world organizing Scrabble tournaments. He once took part in a game where I think it was the highest total points scored in a Scrabble game. It was 1,004 points. He was one of the two players. So he's a Scrabble nut. His life is about Scrabble. And I talked to him a long time, like how much I hate Scrabble so much, because I went to one of his classes that he's teaching to kids, and he gave out this handout. It was like, okay, here's a list of like the 30 words or however many words that require a Q but not a U. So everyone was memorizing this list of words. No one knew the meaning of the words because it's not rewarded in Scrabble. And I'm sitting there looking at this list, and I felt like I was in grade 5, memorizing French conjugations. And I was like, this isn't fun. This is work.
Sure. So games like Scrabble and chess require to get really good require a heavy amount of memorization.
But I'm just going to complete the thought, because you're right. Memorization is exactly what it is. But the chapter is about how one person's work is another person's play. Because memorizing those lists, for a lot of people, there's a kind of joy in it.
Right.
And the same thing with chess. Memorizing, like, there's a lot of people who know, like, a queen's pawn opening 8 moves deep. They know the book on a queen's pawn opening or 10 moves deep. And memorizing it is fun for them. Whereas for 99% of humanity, it's not fun. It's work.
Right, but I would argue memorization is ultimately a small part of those games, and even Scrabble is incredibly strategic.
I don't think it's a small part.
Just, the biggest part of Scrabble is as you're accumulating points and finding opportunities for yourself on the board, you're also trying very hard to limit your opponent's ability to get points.
So memorization is a necessary but not sufficient condition to be a great Scrabble player. And all the great Scrabble players I talked to and I interviewed for the book, they will focus on things like spatial perception and just what you said, the higher order strategic calculus that goes into it. But they talk about that because they take it for granted that they've all memorized all the words they need to know. And for most of us, that's a baseline criterion that I refuse to meet because it's thousands of hours of work. I'm not going to do it. And also, like, this is why I stopped playing chess. Is like, if you're figuring every opening out from scratch, and because you can't even go, 8 or 10 moves deep into a fairly standard opening and knowing what the best moves are. You have to figure it out like move for move. And your opponent knows it because they've memorized it. It's no fun anymore because it means you haven't done the work, and it feels like work. You haven't done the work in order to get to that level.
I agree, but again, with chess, I would say it's even less memorization, or much less memorization than Scrabble involved, because you don't have to know any openings to play a good a grandmaster level chess game. I mean, AlphaGo, which is the Google's chess program, which is or whatever it's called, a DeepMind, is the best chess player in the world, and it will beat anybody without knowing any openings at all.
Well, it doesn't know the openings, but it's been programmed it's essentially the machine learning algorithms that go into programs like that basically channel or impute information from millions and millions and millions of games that have been fed into it. And it's absolutely true that there's no rigorous analytical mode that dictates what each move is going to be. But the machine learning algorithm essentially has studied openings because it's the results of all those games and all those pieces that have been played that are used to program the decision-making algorithm that it uses. So, I would argue against that. I think computers memorize openings in their own way.
No, that's a good point, that it's kind of learning those openings. But a good player will beat a not as good player even playing a horrible opening on purpose. So I specifically have a book that is the worst possible opening move you can make.
Okay.
And it was written by a good grandmaster, and he details 50 games he won against other grandmasters with the worst
so you mean
possible
like
opening.
like he'll move like a rook's pawn?
Yeah, he does pawn to king rook 3 and then pawn to king knight 4, and
That's madness.
yeah.
That's
but
madness.
It's called the Elgan system, and it's amazing because I've tried playing it, and it's so unexpected to people. They do actually make mistakes pretty early on.
That. Some guy wrote a book, I think it was called "I Beat Andy Roddick with a Frying Pan," where Andy Roddick played tennis against the guy, and he was using a frying pan, and the guy was using a racket, and I think Andy Roddick almost beat him, but that's because he's Andy Roddick. Grandmasters find ways. For them it's amusing.
Right. That's my point, though,
is
that there's a skill level at that highest level that you don't need the memorization factor. You need kind of this
so if
raw
you're a
skill.
grandmaster,
And,
you can beat people with a frying pan.
Yeah.
For the rest of us mortals, it's we can't do that.
so okay, we covered card games like bridge, spades, hearts.
Yeah. So the reason, again, no one book can cover every game. One of the reasons that I'm not crazy about card games, and it's a theme that comes in the book, is I like games that tell stories, right? Settlers of Catan tells a certain kind of story. It's a story of development. A good chess game will tell a certain kind of story. You've got attrition on this side, and then there'll be kind of like a blitzkrieg on this side, and a bloody exchange followed by victory. Like there is a kind of narrative that can come out of a good chess game, right? But card games have no narrative whatsoever. If you're playing like, gin rummy or poker, like there's no narrative whatsoever. It's a completely sterile statistics game. And again, if you're gambling, that's great. Card games are great for gambling. Some people like Keno. But to me, that's not gaming. That's a form of income generation.
Okay. I don't 100% agree, but I see where your distinction is. And so is that basically the first lesson, which is that, since storytelling is such a primal part of how we live our lives, it's how we explain the narrative of our careers, it's how we do sales, is by, imagine yourself with this vacuum cleaner, or it's how we, explain things to our children and do parenting. So is that the first thing you learn from playing games and from all the board game play that you've done? Is that how integral storytelling is to the way we live our lives?
It's an absolutely huge part of it. And in fact, I think I confess in one of the chapters is one of the reasons I got into board games. I am pretty sure is that I'm a writer, but I'm a nonfiction writer, and I found I couldn't write fiction. And the reason I couldn't write fiction is I'd have characters staring back at me from the page, and they can say anything, they can do anything. There's this infinity of possibilities, and I just was paralyzed. There's just too many choices. Whereas when I play games, there is a sort of structured, crowdsourced component to the storytelling. When I'm playing a World War II war game, and I just go into great detail about a particular game I played that simulated a battle in Belgium in 1940. I just picked a scenario at random. You're operating within the confines of the rules, and you're operating within the confines of competitive gameplay, where you can't just do anything because your opponent is taking countermeasures. But out of those measures and countermeasures, bounded by rules over the course of many hours, this incredibly exciting narrative emerges. And I go into some detail about it, and I talk about how this like fake battle, which was based on a real battle, how it emerged over all these hours we played. And the story that emerged, that was crowdsourced between the two of us, there's absolutely no way out of my own mind I could have created anything so exciting.
And you even say, I think it was in that chapter, how that particular game has fan fiction around it, or a similar game has fan fiction around it.
Well, a lot of these games, I would say a lot of the sword and sorcery games, it's hard to know where the fan fiction ends and the gaming begins, because many people who play like Dungeons and Dragons style games, it's not surprising that a hugely common vector into that is they got into Lord of the Rings, they got into The Hobbit, and they wanted to recreate the magic of discovering that kind of thing. But also, like me, deep down, they know they're not novelists. They can't sit down and create the universe. The only way they can create the universe is by getting together with their friends and playing for a couple of hours and hoping that something memorable happens. But it doesn't happen out of each person's imagination. It happens because each person pushing for their own character's interests. Again, it starts with a 12-year-old reading Lord of the Rings, but it might end with a 30-year-old playing some deeply involved Dungeons and Dragons style game. But the impulse to create is there, even though most of us can't write a novel or a short story. This is what we do instead.
Well, I wonder if one of the things, when you say you can't write a novel or short story, a big element of speculative fiction is world building. You have to kind of construct a fully thought out world that even goes beyond and can be imagined beyond the finite package of pages in a book. And you can argue with these games, the rules are sufficient enough, the background is sufficient enough that it does this world building for you, so now you can go right into the story.
So one typology I should mention is that there is a distinction between like strategy board games and something called role-playing games. Now, a role-playing game is something like Dungeons and Dragons, or for those who are old enough, they might remember Gamma World or Traveler, which was sort of a science fiction Dungeons and Dragons game. And a role-playing game is, I mean, it's just you're inhabiting a character and you're going in some pretend universe, and it's more just like free-form imaginative role play with some rules and some dice rolling. Even that kind of game, I find, is too much. It's almost like theater. It's almost like you're doing improv, and a lot of the joy in that is dependent on the dungeon master creating a world. And if the dungeon master doesn't have like the spark of creativity to create the world, then it's not going to be a fun game. And very few people have that ability. That's why I kind of know my level when it comes to imagination. I tend to play the more structured, strategic board games where it's less about inhabiting a particular character and more about like commanding an empire or commanding a company or a historical movement or something like that. It tends to be a little bit more abstract as opposed to being, you're inhabiting one person in some medieval dungeon.
So you've been playing these board games for decades. You've been going to all sorts of tournaments, played, let's say, thousands or who knows how many games. All right, what are some of the ways you feel it's benefited you in life?
Well, one way it's benefited is that I've figured out how I can be in the same room with people for a long period of time because, and I don't know how many of your listeners will identify with this. I'm not one of these people who can sit down and like binge watch a Netflix show with my wife or friends. Like I get so bored. After 10 or 15 minutes of watching somebody else's narrative, I get bored. And so I can't really go to movies with people. I can watch TV in bits and pieces, but then I get restless and I get up and I start cooking.
Do you think though that's because maybe most shows are bad or most movies are bad?
I think we're living in a golden age of TV. Like when I was a kid, it was Three's Company and Happy Days. It was crap. I think the TV is good. I think I have the type of brain that I need to be creating something. I'm a writer. It's not, people will say, well, not everyone's a fan of my writing. They'll say it's good writing, it's bad writing, whatever. But I need to be writing something. I need to be creating something. Board gaming is something I can do with other people. It doesn't involve electronics. I'm not staring at a screen. There's no beeps. There's no buzzes. I'm completely present socially because they're so complicated that I can't be answering my phone. But at the same time, I feel like I'm creating a narrative out of it. So it keeps my attention and it keeps me engaged in a way that will never happen with Netflix. And it'll never happen with watching, I like baseball. I'll go to a baseball game. But even at baseball, like, I'll score the game. Or, I'll start reciting statistics to people. Like, I need to find some way to engage myself in a creative way. I can't just do it passively. And I think the kind of people I'm describing, I think my co-author is one of them, tend to be drawn to these games. And even though it's subcultural, it helps them engage with the people around them in a way that I think develops them socially such that it benefits their relationships, even with people who aren't gamers, because they have this thing that they can plug in to a social life and the confidence and the sense of social succor that gives them, they're just happier with their friends and their family and their colleagues.
So that's a direct benefit, meaning because of games, this positive thing happens in your life. What's like a metaphor benefit?
Well, so there are...
Because you make some metaphors here. Like
okay, let's take Monopoly. Not everybody goes to school and studies economics and understands how screwed up our economy is, right? I talk about how Monopoly, even though it's a crap game, the way Monopoly is a crap game helps explain why our economy is a crap economy. Because Monopoly obeys something that an engineer might call an unstable dynamical system. So in an unstable dynamical system, once the system starts to move in one direction, it accelerates in that direction. It's sort of like a pencil standing on its tip. Once it deviates in any direction, it continues to deviate in that direction until it falls. I talk about how hyper-capitalist societies, like in a game of Monopoly, are unstable dynamical systems. You're playing Monopoly, some guy's winning, they've got Boardwalk and Park Place, you have nothing, they're making more money, and every time you land on them, you have to mortgage properties, you have to sell stuff. So not only are you giving them money, you're taking away your ability to make money. It's an unstable dynamical system in that it drives poor toward bankruptcy and it drives rich toward victory.
Right. So, but just to define, you're basically saying with games like Monopoly, there becomes a tipping point where even though the game's still continuing, the rich are just going to become the winners,
Right.
and the poor are just going to become the losers,
And
even though they still have to play it all out.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons it's such a crap game is that often you're half an hour into the game and you know who's going to win.
And your
But
point
you still
also
have to sit there like just stewing, like you have to play 2 hours. You don't want to be a poor sport and abandon the game, but everyone's pissed off because they know this guy's going to win and he's lording it over everybody. But the game keeps going. And Settlers of Catan, I notice you have a copy here on the table. The Europeans and their socialistic wisdom, they have built in stabilizing factors. So like if you play Settlers of Catan, there's this robber. The robber is essentially a taxing agent. It's a tax and spend mechanism where you take the robber, and 9 times out of 10, the robber ends up on the property of the guy who's winning. So it ends up being a break on victory for the guy who's winning, and it gives a chance for other people to catch up. All Euro games, all modern games have a mechanism like that.
And by the way, so you call this a stabilizing factor that it tends to hurt the party that's winning more than it hurts the party that's losing. I like the fact in those types of games where the stabilizing factor can be used strategically as well. So it's not necessarily something that by chance I'm going to roll a dice and suddenly I'm like losing.
No. It's used as an underdog factor.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Listen, I know this very well. As a small business owner, you already have a lot on your plate. The last thing you need to worry about is your bank. That's why Axos Bank provides simple, convenient, and hassle-free banking that business owners like you deserve. Axos is so confident in their basic business checking account that they'll give you $50 to try it out. Just use promo code JAMES and visit axosbank.com/James, that's the critical part, today to get started. Axos is 100% digital with much lower overhead costs than traditional banks, so they pass those savings on to their customers. That's why they're able to do this. This means no maintenance fees, no minimum balance requirements, unlimited domestic ATM fee reimbursements, your first 50 checks for free, and up to 200 free transactions per month on their basic business checking account. Axos lets you access your money anytime, anywhere. Their time-saving digital tools allow you to check your accounts, make deposits, and pay bills wherever you are. Stay ahead of the challenges of modern business with a bank that works for you. Visit axosbank.com/James to learn more and get your $50. Axos Bank, small business banking simplified.
There's another game I talk about. It's called Power Grid. Power Grid's a great game. It's originally a German game, and it's a game where you're trying to build these networks of electric power networks in Germany. Or there's maps for all over the world. It's a great game, but you have to buy fuel for your power plants. The way the game works is that whoever is losing gets to buy their fuel first, and then the price goes up, and the other people buy, and the person who's winning, they buy their fuel last. They pay the highest wholesale cost for their fuel to power their power plants. So it's like this built-in socialistic mechanism into the game. And all this, I'm making the game sound like kind of dreary, but people love it because it means there's this natural mechanism within the game. And it's not artificial like we were talking about before, where like you're playing chess with some guy and you take the rooks off and they're being condescending. The game mechanics, as the game goes, give a leg up to the person who's losing. And people just enjoy it more. So it usually means that even when you're playing against a really good player, it's usually pretty close to the end of the game.
So, but in Settlers of Catan, there's this notion of the robber who kind of prevents
It's
the
Robin
building
Hood.
of resources.
He's Equalizer.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily a natural part of the game. It's sort of put in there just to stabilize.
So it's put in there for a couple of reasons. I would argue
It's like having like an ultra high rich tax or something.
So the guy who invented the game, I don't know why he put the robber in, but what I'm guessing is that a part of it is even if you know you're going to lose, it gives you a psychological boost to know that you can shaft the guy who's going to win. Because when you move the robber onto like the most lucrative property on the board, the hex that's generating, like 6 wheat every time the guy lands on it, like that's a good feeling. It's vaguely empowering to know that, well, okay, I'm going to lose the game, but I can still shaft the guy who's going to win. As opposed to a monopoly, when all your properties are mortgaged, you can't do anything. You are sitting there just getting victimized the whole game. It's why they say if Monopoly were introduced now, no game company would produce it because the mechanism in it is completely antiquated.
Right, and you also refer in the book. You say chess is doesn't have this stabilizing factor, but I would argue that skill is the stabilizing factor. So you could be losing, and maybe you made a blunder in the beginning, but ultimately you could create complexity in situations where, because you could see
It's very
further ahead,
unlikely.
it
I
stabilizes.
call chess an unstable dynamical system because all other factors being equal, two evenly matched players, if one player blunders away a piece, I'm not talking about a calculated sacrifice where you give up a pawn for positional
sure.
advantage. I'm talking about you blunder away even a pawn, but certainly a bishop or a knight, you're going to lose. And the reason you're going to lose is because not only have you lost a piece, you now have one fewer tools to put pressure on your opponent. And a good player will leverage a small advantage into a medium-sized advantage and leverage a medium-sized advantage into a large advantage. And I show that same dynamic applies, to military battles, and it applies to economics, and it applies negatively, right? Like, one of the lessons I draw, in the United States, one of the reasons people remain in poverty is, you lose your job, and so you lose your health care. You lose your health care, so, you're living in pain. You're living in pain, so you get addicted to drugs. You get addicted to drugs, so you lose your family. There's no natural stabilizing force because your social safety net sucks. Part of the lessons you learn from games is you learn how the rules governing a game create a certain kind of dynamic which can either accelerate systems or can reverse systems. And that's true of economics. It's true, as I say, in military contexts. And those are the kind of lessons I try and draw out. I say Monopoly is a terrible game, but you can learn important lessons about society based on how terrible it is.
So that's a good example about the guy who loses his job, and then there's sort of a downward spiral. But first, it doesn't necessarily apply to all aspects of capitalism. So, for instance, MySpace was by far the winner, and should have dominated every other social network, but Facebook essentially changed the rules a little bit and then dominated MySpace. So in the real world, you can change the rules themselves are dynamic. So Facebook said, okay, we're going to make a social network that has confirmed identity, which nobody's ever done before. So suddenly they redefined the category of a social network and flipped the board on MySpace. And you could argue the same thing. Now, yes, in your example, person loses his job and there's that downward spiral, but there are many examples anecdotally that of somebody who loses everything and then makes it back. This sort of the apocryphal, start from scratch
You're
story.
absolutely right, but you're a person who's captivated by acts of genius. So when you talk about the grandmaster who blunders away a piece but still manages to win, you're also talking about the guy with 170 IQ whose startup went bankrupt but still finds a way to get back in the game and create $1 billion company because this person won the lottery in terms of intelligence. Yes, that happens, but it shouldn't take a staggering act of genius to get back in the game, whether you're talking about a board game or you're talking about the economics of society.
I agree, but maybe there's a lesson there in that reframing the rules is important. So if you don't get, if your boss hates you and you don't get a promotion at work, you might think, okay, the downward spiral is going to begin. My boss is going to hate me forever. I'm never going to get a promotion. I'm going to eventually have to quit or whatever. But you could change the rules and say, well, I don't have to stay at this job. I'm going to apply for another job. So it's kind of a lesson too that in the real world, there's not one set of rules.
So that's actually an interesting point. And so this game that I play, I'm going to go back to it, Advanced Squad Leader. There's thousands of different scenarios in this game. You'll recreate this battle. Some of the battles are actually from before World War II. They're from the Chinese-Japanese War. There's a Korean module. And so there's thousands and thousands of scenarios, and every scenario is different. So like you'll look at the scenario and it'll say, like let's say it's a German-Russian scenario, and it'll say, to win the scenario, the Germans must capture this building, or the Russians must exit 3 tanks off the side of the board, something like that. Or the victory conditions will be more complex than that. And one thing I always advise every single player, read the victory conditions every single turn. And the reason I tell them that is because what happens is you're playing the game and you say, well, to win, I have to do this. And the best way to do that is to do this and this. And then you spend the whole game trying to do those other things because you've programmed your mind and says, well, in order to win, I'm going to have to do this and this. And then as the game develops, you realize, wait a sec, there's a way to actually fulfill the victory conditions without going about my previous plan. I can take this building instead, or I can do this. And the game ends and you're like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. I had my head in the sand, and all I was doing was thinking about fulfilling my original plan. And I could have won the game if I had rethought it. So I tell people, look at the victory conditions every single turn and ask yourself, is there another way of doing it? And the same is true of life. You know, people get hung up. They say, if I can make $250,000 a year, I'd be happy. And they spend their whole life trying to make a certain amount of money, and they don't step back and say, you know what? Like, is that true? Like, do I need to live in the city? Do I?
Right.
They don't reevaluate the victory conditions of their own life because they get hung up on intermediate goals.
I think that's an incredibly valuable lesson because, and I'll apply it to chess, is that you can start an attack on the queen side, for instance, and your opponent might think, oh, he's trying to win over there, like win pieces or whatever, get space, whatever. But it's also just deflecting your opponent so you can focus on the
A good chess player
king.
sees the whole board every turn. Like a punk like me, if he's focused, on an attack on one side, that's all he sees, and everything else is a sideshow. And then it's the sideshow that kills you because your opponent's advancing his pawns in the sideshow, and you're like, who cares? I have the 7-move combination I'm going to use to capture this guy's pawn or whatever. And because bad players, like people who lack self-awareness in life, they don't see the whole board. All they see is the narrow parochial goal they're going for, and they get frustrated.
Yeah, I think that's so there's this storytelling aspect. There's this
Self-knowledge is a big part of it.
yes, self-knowledge as relating to what is your bigger picture. Is it to make 250,000? Is it to be happy? Is it to do what you love? These are, sometimes people lose, like you say, sometimes people lose track of the bigger picture because they're focused on kind of a short-term win on the board in front of them.
And it doesn't take a whole lifetime to do that. Like some of these games might take an hour. It's amazing how much you can get distracted in the space of an hour, like within the world of the game. I'm not talking about distractions from like your phone or your kids. I'm talking about like strategic distractions. And I can't tell you how many games I've played that at the end of it, I've just slapped myself and said, if you had taken 5 seconds to literally physically stand back from the board and look at it and seen what the position was, you would have seen there was a clear path to victory instead of banging your head against the wall against this strategy that you formulated at the beginning that was never going to work. And I do think there are analogies between that and everyday life.
And I'm just going to address a game that you don't like, but Scrabble, oftentimes players will be focused on, I've got to put down a 7-letter word to get that 50-point bonus, when in fact, so they keep on, putting out worthless words that don't make any points because they're trying to accumulate more letters to get that 7-letter word. They get so focused on that while their opponent is just racking up points, and they lose the game. So the same thing happens there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. By the way, my friend Daniel Kalman, who I've played games with my whole life, he has a great house rule when it comes to Scrabble, and his rule is no stupid words, and he decides what words are stupid.
Well, that's great for him then if he's the house.
Well, no, he makes good decisions. Like stupid words are words that no one uses, and that's one thing I hate about Scrabble is like you don't have to know what the word means.
Yeah.
So even like, imagine how educational Scrabble would be if everyone who played Scrabble like knew what a kuzbox is or any of these gimmicky words that like you could spell without a vowel or whatever, or like, you have, I don't know, 4 M's and nothing else. Like if everybody knew those words, then we'd live in the society of people with incredible vocabulary. But it rewards the memorization of arbitrary alphabetic codes.
Although this is an argument that could never end, but I do love the fact that once you have that memorization down, and by the way, to do that memorization requires a lot of skill and discipline as well, because there's really tens of thousands of words if you really want to master Scrabble that you need. Let's say there's 190,000 legal words. It's probably a good 3 to 5,000 words you should memorize to be great. But given that, which requires skill, discipline, hard work, given that, then there's this strategic factor, which is, how to block your opponent from the triple word scores, how to block your opponent from other opportunities. And that's very strategic at the highest level.
One of the stories, I think it's in the book, is that, as I mentioned, my friend John Chu, he goes and he administers Scrabble tournaments all over the world. And one of the places where English Scrabble is super popular is in Thailand, for historical reasons. Not quite sure what they are, but like there's a lot of high-level tournaments in Thailand. And some of the people there who are crazy good at Scrabble, they don't speak English. And in fact, there was a world-leading English Scrabble player, I think he lived in the UK, who just got bored of winning tournaments, and he taught himself French Scrabble. And I think he won the French championships, even though he can't order a croissant in a cafe in French.
It makes sense, because if you think about it, you could win simply by knowing words like QAT, QOPF.
But this guy memorized the dictionary. It's crazy.
It's amazing to me that EDH somehow is a legal word.
That's a
in
stupid
Scrabble.
word. That is a stupid word.
Right. So
You just said a stupid word.
But again, there's a beauty to the fact that someone sits around and because
No,
they want to get better at
but it's not
Scrabble,
beautiful.
they learn the discipline of learning which
No,
words
no,
are
that's-
important.
No, you're romanticizing something stupid. It's a waste of time.
No,
It's a
because
complete waste of-
but like with those Q words, Q is a hard letter to get rid of because you need the U as well. So strategically, if you want to get better at Scrabble, in terms of like the meta learning of learning how to play Scrabble, learn how to get rid of the difficult
Right.
to get rid of words like letters like Q. So you learn QAT, QI, QOPF, and so on.
So, like, tonight, I want you to memorize the license plates of every single person in your apartment building, and we're going to create a game out of that. And it's going to inspire meta learning and all the things you just said. It's going to be so, it's going to do it. Yeah.
If I enjoyed that game because there was a big enough population of people where I could feel validated by defeating all of those players, then I would do that.
You know what? I believe that.
Because a game part of a game is about winning and self-esteem and
Well, okay, so I'll be honest. Like, I usually don't like to come on podcasts and beat up on little kids, but everything I just said about the reasons I don't like Scrabble, you could apply to a spelling bee. Like, spelling bee is about memorizing like how to spell words, and in fact, essentially, it's in a way it's worse than Scrabble because Scrabble you at least have the geometric spatial aspect and the strategic aspect. Spelling bee just rewards a kid's ability to memorize lists of letters.
but
I hate spelling bees. I refuse.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I don't get ESPN 8 or whatever it's on. Like I refuse to watch spelling bees.
But I would argue with spelling bees, part of the training is learning the Latin roots, the Greek roots. So when you do encounter
true.
a word you don't know, you can piece it together.
That's actually a good point. I think that's your best point today. Yeah.
Thank God. I was getting nervous.
Yeah, okay, good.
Let's talk about some other lessons you've learned. And I think also there's historical lessons. You learn kind of the world we live in now by safely experiencing, the world we lived in the past.
Yeah, and
Or even with Settlers of Catan, which is not based on any real world, you learn about how trade and cooperation and resources, at a very basic economics level, kind of get distributed through society.
well, if you look at microeconomics, like if you're an undergrad studying micro, one of the things that's just the hardest thing to get your head around is that your professor will say, imagine two islands, and one of the islands is better at producing everything than the other island. Like, they're better at producing guns, they're better at producing butter. Name a product, they're better. And the other island is crap at producing everything, but there's differences in the relative efficiencies in the various industries. You can prove mathematically that it still makes sense for trade to take place between the two islands because even though one island can make everything cheaper in absolute terms, you can still generate efficiencies for both by trading. That plays out in Catan. Some guy will have a sheep port, and no one needs sheep, but he's got this ability to turn sheep into stuff that people actually want. And you learn supply and demand. Like, have you played Settlers of Catan?
No.
Okay. Well, so this might be lost on you. But Settlers of Catan, it's a game where you have wood, you have brick, you have stone, you have sheep, you have wheat. These are the basic resources. And depending on the roll of the dice, the market could be flooded with some of these resources, or the market, like no one will have any stone, and you need stone to build cities in the basic game. So no one is building cities because there's no stone, and you're all waiting for the dice to roll so that someone gets stone. But it's also just very common that like everyone has sheep. They're just all trying to get rid of sheep. Say, hey, you have a stone. Give me a stone. I'll give you like 10 sheep. And the guy's like, no, I don't. What am I going to do with sheep? That is probably the best way I know to teach like a 9-year-old how supply and demand works.
And also, it's an interesting thing about currency and exchange rates and so
nothing
on.
has inherent, like when you're talking about economics, nothing has inherent worth. Like you're never going to win an argument in Settle of Catan saying, a sheep has intrinsic worth to you. It's like this cool thing to have a sheep. And, even a 9-year-old kid is going to say, a sheep is worth to me what I can buy with a sheep. And I already have all this sheep and I don't need your sheep. And that's bullshit. Like a 9-year-old kid knows that that's BS and can understand fairly sophisticated concepts because they're motivated to win. One of the themes of the book is that the desire to defeat people and be competitive just has a natural accelerating effect on learning because no one wants to be humiliated. Everyone's hyper-focused if they're competitive. That's why it's important to be competitive. Not too competitive because then you're a jerk. But if you're not competitive at all and you come to the table and say, well, I don't care if I win, that's not only is that not fun for you, it's not fun for everybody.
Right. You actually, this is an important part of the book, because I want to continue with what you were saying. But, Joe in your co-author says in a good game, everybody agrees to abide by the rules. Everybody agrees to take the game seriously. They make a sincere effort to win, and they agree not to take the game so seriously that they take game moves personally and get angry and so on. And I think that second point is really, the first point is obvious. You got to play by the rules. Second point is very important, is the most important, which is that everybody needs, to the best of their efforts, take the game seriously, or else it's no fun for anybody.
It's absolutely true. It's like the tension in an elastic band. If you pull too hard, it's going to break. But if you don't pull, it's a useless piece of rubber. There has to be a competitive tension that exists in the zone where it's fun. But I hate it when I'm playing a game and they come to the table and they say, I don't care if I win or lose. And then they act in this really slacker fashion, like they'll intentionally make stupid moves. And they might be doing it. It's kind of like maybe they're insecure, and so they want to be self-defeating before the game defeats them. They want to, like, this is the way of coping with insecurities. I get that. But it makes it really takes the fun out of it for everybody else because it takes the fun out of winning. And it also, it takes away the competitive tension, which is where the enjoyment of a game comes from.
And this is an important part of, organization behavior, whether it's a company or a school or classroom or the government or whatever. If there's an employee at a company who's just going there for the paycheck, the company's not going to be as good or as efficient as if everybody is there because they buy into the vision of the company or they buy into the vision of the charity or the organization or the classroom and all participate and all want, this to be the most either educational or enjoyable or profitable experience for all the others involved. I think this is a key lesson in life as well.
So this book is not marketed as a management book, but there's at least one chapter where we do get into some of this stuff. And that's a chapter where we talk about the difference between competitive games, which is like 90% of games where you're trying to win. And then there's a style of game which has become popular called cooperative games. So I'm not sure if you've heard of a game called Pandemic. So
only in the book.
I think it gets mentioned there. There's a game called Eldritch Horror. There's a Japanese game called Hanabi. These are all cooperative games. And the idea is you win or lose as a team. So like in Pandemic, you play the role of like, a scientist or a military guy, but you're all on the same team trying to defeat an epidemic before it destroys the planet. And either the disease destroys the planet or you defeat the epidemic and you all win, but you all win or lose together. And that chapter has the most to do with management science because we're talking about how, like, a corporation or an activist group, any kind of business is nominally a cooperative organization. It's not a competitive organization. You're all ostensibly working for the same purpose. You're trying to serve customers. You're trying to generate profit, right? However, there's all sorts of competitive pressures that come up within that collaborative organization. And those are modeled within games like Pandemic. One problem we talk about, it's famous in gaming, it's known as the alpha player problem. The alpha player problem is that you're playing a game like Pandemic, and you're all supposed to be a team. There's like 5 or 6 of you. But because you're all going to the same objective, there's one guy, and it's usually a guy, who has played the game many times and is just telling everybody else what to do. And no one has any autonomy whatsoever because this doesn't happen in competitive games because you're competing against each other. But in a collaborative game, a cooperative game, because you're all on the same team, you've got one know-it-all telling everybody else what to do. No one's having fun because, they're just like robots. And the question is, how do you defeat this alpha player problem? Because when you confront the alpha player, he's like, hey, do you want to win or not? You want to win? I know the game better than you, listen to me. And you're like, well, okay, I guess I want to win, so let's do it. And I talk about how many organizations suffer from an alpha player problem. Where, you have a law firm where a guy has done the same kind of contract, for 20 years. And so he insists on taking all that kind of work. And he says, well, we'll serve the client better if I take this. But meanwhile, you're not mentoring anybody. No one's getting any experience. When this person retires, no one in the company has any institutional knowledge about how to do this work. So you get alpha player problems within organizations. And you can model how to deal with it based on, it's actually a very popular genre now, these cooperative games. And I should say that the creators of these games have found ways to deal with the alpha player problems. There's subtle techniques to deal with it.
So yeah, you mentioned in the book that one of the techniques is to give people private goals that are secret, and that so they're moving towards not only the goal of the whole, but the goal of the individual. And I would argue in an organization, particularly in today's day and age, there's high turnover in every job. Everybody has a private goal for their careers and their lives, but then there's the public goal of the organization. And the job of management and really everybody on the team is to kind of assist people with their private goals to figure them out so that we're all happy to accomplish the public goal together, which I think is a great lesson from these cooperative games. I would argue, by the way, competitive games have the same problem. So if a grandmaster of chess is playing a beginner of chess, neither of them is going to have a fun time. So if the goal of the game is not just to win, but also to have fun, you kind of need both people to be fairly skilled, or at least have private goals that are that could be met by the players of the game.
You need meta rules. So one thing, and this is common sense. I don't think you need to read this book to know it, but there are rules that are written down in the book, a rule book for a game, and then there's meta rules that no one writes down, and the meta rules are particular to a group of friends. So there could be a meta rule that says when you win, you don't gloat. Or it could be that, you're playing with a bunch of frat guys and 90% of the fun is gloating. And people, you're playing, you're reminding them of like that time you beat them 10 years ago. And it's fun. It's like, they're all in on it. And it's a meta rule that says gloating is encouraged. It's part of the game. And unless you know the meta rules of a group of friends, like you have to be careful. And these meta rules can vary drastically based on the groups of people you're playing with. By the way, I should just going back, you were talking about public and private goals. There's a great game we talk about in the book. I've never played it, but Joan Moriarty, my co-author, does a great job of describing it. It's a game called Dead of Winter. And it's a zombie apocalypse game where it's ostensibly collaborative, right? So you and your friends, you all play these characters. It's kind of like, what's that popular TV show? The Walking Dead?
Walking Dead.
Yeah. So, it's kind of like that where, one guy plays like, I don't know, the mechanic or the soldier, and the goal is to survive the zombie apocalypse, right? That's the public goal. And if you don't survive, everyone loses. Like, you go home, everyone loses. However, everyone has a private goal, and the private goals are super creepy. Like, the private goal is like, the person to your left must die. Or, you must raid this particular building. You're a drug addict, and you must raid this particular building and get all the medicine or something like that. But you can't tip your hand. You can't win unless you satisfy the private goal. So everyone at the beginning of the game, everyone's like, oh yeah, let's all for one and one for all. And then as the game goes on, one guy's like, hey, I'm just going to go over to this building. I'm just going to go here. And everyone's sort of like, well, why would you go there? It's like, oh yeah, I think it'll help the group if I wander off and get this medicine and stuff.
So this doesn't sound like your ideal kind of game because there's that extra psychological component.
So I'd be terrible at it because I would believe everybody. They every lame excuse they give for self-serving behavior, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. Like, I'm super gullible when I play games like this. But I'm in love with the concept of the game because it's exactly like an organization where you have, if the company goes bankrupt, you all lose, right? On the other hand, everyone has private goals. Like, one guy is trying to get a promotion, or somebody is trying to uh, I don't know, sell their stock shares, artificially inflate the value of the company. Like one partner may be trying to get out, so they want to have an incredibly profitable year so they can parachute out, even though it's not in the interest of the rest of the company. But they have to convince everybody it is. And so there's this gamesmanship, and that game exists on the cusp of competitive and collaborative. So it's this really interesting psychological space. That game's called Dead of Winter. I've never played it, but it's the chapter on that is really evocative.
It reminds me of parenting a little bit, because I always say about my kids, when they tell me something, there's usually a good reason to what they're telling me, and there's a real reason. So if my daughter says, "Oh, I gotta study at the library," that's a really good reason. I'm not going to say no to her. But the real reason might be, oh, there's lots of boys hanging out at the library for whatever reason, and that's the real reason she wants to go.
So do you live in Riverdale? Like, this is such a wholesome, meeting boys at the library.
No, that's just my example.
Okay,
I don't know if she's ever actually been to a library.
It's such a wholesome hypothetical, like, meeting boys at the library.
But it just explains the example very well, and that's the difference between these private and public goals.
Yeah, and it's part of navigating society, and it's.
And so would you argue then playing games like this helps you sort of navigate that a little better?
I think what happens is people choose games that accord with their ability to navigate the kind of situations you're talking. Like this thing with your kid going to the library and stuff like that. Like this is one of the reasons that I'm glad I'm married to somebody who can sniff out bad actors in the zombie apocalypse, because I believe my kids could tell me anything, right? Like I'm doing a project on crystal meth, I gullible, my wife isn't, and so we're a good team that way.
So if you're playing a game, it's also good to pick members of your team. If you're playing a game that involves a team,
know your limitations,
and pick people on your team who kind of.
Well, you got to know your limitations, but it's often this self-selection. Like I don't play social site games because not only do I lose, I don't even understand why I lose. So like at the end of the game, people will be explaining about like all the subtle, shifts and alliances and like secret winks and stuff like that. And I just have no idea what they're talking about. It all went over my head. I don't mind losing in a game as long as I learn something about why I lost. But I find in social site games, I don't even have the mental faculties to appreciate why I lost. Which, by the way, would be a lot like playing chess against a grandmaster. You're playing chess against a grandmaster, and 7 moves in, they're like, "Well, you lost the game," and you're like, "What do you mean I lost the game?" It's like, "Well, you'll see." And then, like 20 moves later, you realize they're right, but that's frustrating. I don't mind getting beat, but I don't want it to be an invisible kind of defeat. I want it to be something I learn from.
Well, that's why I think also these classic games that don't seem like cooperative are actually more cooperative than you think, because at the end of the game, both players want to play a beautiful game. They want to have the opportunity to play a beautiful game.
Jordan Peterson says, I forget where he said it, the purpose of any game is to get invited back, right? And if you spike the football and no one invites you back because you're acting like a jerk, that's the equivalent of making the brilliant chess move in the burning building, where you fulfilled your short-term programming, but you've screwed yourself in the long term. And that's supposed to be the difference between humans and machines.
So a lot of this book, I think, is it's great in that for me it was an introduction to a lot of these more this style of board game, as opposed to the I like all the classic games. I'm not really that familiar with these strategic board games. It's almost like a love letter to these board games is the book. But you do have a lot of these great lessons, and I think we've covered a lot of them. But would you add anything else to what we've covered in terms of life lessons?
Yeah, I think one of the life lessons, and this is covered in the very first chapter, and it's covered by my co-author, who, again, because she works in a board game cafe, she has just seen so many smart people choose games, and she sees what works and what doesn't. And games are fun, but you also need to gird yourself when you start the game and remind yourself, this is a game, and if I lose, or even if I don't understand the rules, it's not going to be something I'm going to be humiliated about. Because one of the biggest laments in the book is that board gaming has to some extent remained a subculture because people who would love to play some of these games are afraid that if they play it, they'll look stupid. I mean, this is like she describes the scene where people are looking at all these amazing, cool Euro games, but they're a little bit complicated. And then they'll like at the end, it's sort of like, well, I'm just going to order the same food I ordered, when I was a little kid. They'll get the Ameritrash game, and you have to play with people who aren't going to judge you. If you're playing with people who are going to make fun of you because you lost the first 5 times you played a game, it's not the game that's the problem. It's the people you're gaming with. It's the atmosphere you're gaming, of the people you're gaming with. So try and pick people who are charitable and well socialized and who are themselves gamers. Because if you're a good gamer, the last thing you want to do is make fun of somebody who doesn't know the rules or whatever. Because if you do that, that's one fewer people you're going to be able to play with. Because they're just going to say, you know what, this is a bunch of mean-spirited nerds, and I don't want to play. So when I play with beginners, I'm extra nice. Once they get good, that's when I can start being a jerk. But gamers owe it to beginners to be extremely sympathetic as they're learning the game, because otherwise we're not going to attract new people to the hobby.
So a lot of these lessons, it feels like, are the direct benefits of playing these games to your life. So, for instance, you enjoy them, you learn history, you learn some aspects of capitalism and what makes a good game, what makes a good set of rules, what makes a good player. I'm wondering if there's more lessons in life. Like, this is how I acquire skills in something, or this is how I learn when I need to be more offensive rather than defensive.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because I think there are some people I play with who don't win just because they have a defensive mindset. And
or too offensive. They can be too optimistic.
So one of my problems in chess is that like 8 or 9 or 10 moves in, I always start, look, how am I going to attack? How am I going to develop an attack? And sometimes the answer to the question, how am I going to develop an attack, is you don't have the pieces developed to attack. You have to wait. Or don't attack at all. Lure the person into their own bad attack.
Right, because and this is similar from how you described Catan. It reminds me of chess in that with both games, let's say, assuming all people are fairly equal, the way you win is accumulating small advantages throughout the game until finally everybody realizes, oh, this guy has huge advantages, and now he's going to use them.
But he's the person who does it subtly. There are games, like there's a lot of games, and Power Grid is one of them, where there's no advantage to coming out of the starting block and just like powering through and shock and awe, because as soon as you do that, people are going to try and stop you. One thing I don't like about Monopoly is there's no subtlety to it. Like, there is nothing in the Monopoly game mechanism that really prevents you from a shock and awe strategy, right? Because even if people don't want to deal with you, you'll eventually have them over a barrel, and they're going to owe you $1,200, and you're going to be able to just to take it out of them.
But Monopoly, though, let's say one person does go out the gate aggressively, the other people will probably form some sort of alliance. Like, this happens in Risk as well. The other people will, at least a casual alliance for a little while to
Yeah, you know how long that alliance lasts? That alliance lasts just as long as until one of them lands on one of the guy's properties and doesn't have the cash on hand to pay him and has to start selling houses and hotels at 50% discount, may I add. And suddenly they're like, you know what? Forget that alliance. This guy wants these 2 railroads. Take the 2 railroads. And then the other people in the alliance are, no, you're what happened to the deal? And you're like, the deal lasts until you have to save yourself.
Okay. Another example is in the card game Hearts. So I'm not sure if you're familiar. Let's say throughout the course of a game, you realize one of the players is trying to do, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, one of the players is trying to shoot the moon.
Yeah, no, I don't play Hearts because I'm not a grandmother in Del Boca Vista. So like,
no, it's a great game.
It's not a great game. It's these are bad games. So like, has my book taught you nothing? Like the book, there's so many.
I
great
can see
games.
why the psychological games are hard for you.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah. I'm still learning in that respect. No, it is possible in many games for like a coalition of losers to take on a winner. But the dynamics of most of these games are pretty ruthless, and usually the winner has a way of breaking down the coalition. And then, by the way, then there's one other person to be mad at. Not only are you mad at the guy who won, you're also mad at the other loser who backstabbed you. And so, like, you end up being mad at everybody. Monopoly is a terrible, terrible game. And by the way, I've probably played 100 games of Monopoly. There was a time that I played, but the reason I played it was because there was no other good games out there. When I was a kid, Monopoly was, on Risk, they were the best of a batch of bad games. But it's sort of like television. We're older now. We don't watch Three's Company. We don't watch Happy Days. We don't watch Chachi in Charge. I could go on all day.
So what would you say are the and we'll close with this. What would you say are the minimum qualities of what you consider a good game?
Minimum qualities of a good game are that every player plays the whole game, and you don't have people being eliminated and sitting there, getting mad at you. So
Okay, so Monopoly and Risk are out,
Monopoly and Risk are out.
but Scrabble, chess,
Yeah, and
is still in.
here's what, and this is the most
Poker's out.
It shouldn't involve gambling, right? Because hey, there's nothing wrong with shouldn't be illegal, but gambling is not board gaming. It's a separate thing.
Well, poker, if you play in tournaments, it's not gambling. Backgammon, if you play in tournaments, it's not gambling. But there's an element of chance,
Backgammon,
and there's decision making about
backgammon is a gray area. By the way, most people who play backgammon don't play with the doubling cube, so it becomes a different game. But here's the most controversial one. This is the one that's like totally going to light your social media on fire with trolls. Okay, I refuse to play any game that requires knowledge from outside the game system to play. So I refuse to play Trivial Pursuit because Trivial Pursuit is a test of information you learned outside the game.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So it's a high school quiz, and people say, "Oh, you shouldn't feel stupid if you lose in Trivial Pursuit." I lose in Trivial Pursuit all the time, and I do feel stupid because it's a test. It's like, do you know who directed Gone with the Wind? I said, no, I have no idea who. Oh, well, everybody knows that, and like I'm like, well, this isn't fun. This is just this is and Scrabble, I would argue, is a game that requires knowledge from outside the game system because it's a test of the catalog of English words, and that's why I don't like it.
Okay, but like, and I just keep getting back to the classical games because that's what I know. But like poker, chess, Go, keep within the context of the game. You don't need to know anything outside the game.
Yeah, chess. I have other problems with chess. Of the games you just mentioned, backgammon is my favorite game because I think a good game should have some element of chance. Otherwise, it just becomes an IQ test. And I just know from experience, I don't have the IQ to develop my chess ability beyond a certain level. Whereas in backgammon, I always feel like I have a chance because I know statistics pretty well, and that there's always if I get the right roll, I'm going to be able to get back in this game, and that's a fun feeling to have. If you feel like you're losing and there's no way to get back in, but you have to play your grim hand out to the end, that's what turns people off board games. That's a negative feeling.
And any other qualities to like, because I would argue with some of these games, there's so many rules. I feel that's not fun.
It should have a story to tell, and if you're playing, I don't know, Hearts or Canasta or whatever it is you're playing down in Florida. I mean that if there's no narrative and it's just like, did I get the right card or no? If you're playing checker, I mean checkers actually requires a lot of intelligence, but it doesn't have a story. I always tell people, try and tell a story with your games. It could be a simple story like in chess. It could be, a more developed story like in Catan, or it could be like a really detailed story like the kind I described in my chapter about Advanced Squad Leader. But it's nice when the game's over and it's not just you won, I lost, or I won, you lost, but it's like we crowdsourced a narrative, and no other game that will ever be played in human history will have quite that same narrative. That's kind of a cool feeling. And that's what impelled me to write the book.
Well, Jonathan Kay, your book is Your Move, What Board Games Teach Us About Life. Right now, what's your absolute most favorite game?
That'll never change. It's Advanced Squad Leader. But there's a game that everyone needs to play to teach them about statistics. It's over in half an hour, which is what a lot of people like. They like shorter games. It's actually a classic. It's called Can't Stop.
I don't know it.
You don't know it. Most people don't know it. It's one of these games that deserves to be in the the Hall of Fame of games, and it's called Can't Stop. It's a simple game, and the title says it all. It's what's known as a push your luck game. But if you're in a game shop and you're listening to this, or you're on Amazon, Can't Stop, and you can play it with like a 10-year-old. It's a super fun game, and it deserves to be up there with you talked about Connect 4 and all these other games. I'm a big fan.
What's your number one classic game?
It's chess, but I hate it so much. Like, it's and it's actually, and I didn't know you were a chess master until I came on. Like, I'm not sure I would have come on if I knew you were a chess master. Like, it's
because you hate just chess players.
It's intimidating. No, it's kind of like, a person, I don't know, it's like a person telling you they went to Harvard or something. Like, it's
believe me, most chess players, even grandmasters, are the stupidest people you'll ever meet.
Well, anyway, I'm very impressed, and so I didn't realize you had such high qualifications to conduct this interview. Yeah.
All right, thanks. The one nice thing you say at the interview. Hang on, just don't go yet. I want to remind you, I want you to have a copy of what I think is one of my best books that I've ever written, Reinvent Yourself. Reinvent Yourself is all about taking action, no matter where you are starting from. And in this book, I disclose how I tell dozens of stories of other people, how we've turned our lives around, and how I know you can too, no matter where you're starting from, because I've started from the bottom. Whether you want to supplement your income with a little extra cash or replace your job, the book Reinvent Yourself will show you how. I've reserved a copy for anyone listening to this today. All you have to do is go to www.reinventbook.net. That's www.reinventbook.net. It's possible to create the life you want. And I've talked to so many people about this, plus my own experience. So go to www.reinventbook.net right now. I'm excited about what this book can do for you. Just go to www.reinventbook.net to learn more. That's www.reinventbook.net.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.